Your Creative Push, episode 330.
Because it's so easy when you're getting very anxious or you're getting upset or discouraged or all these things, it's all in your head. Like you don't know how it's going to play out.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is John Wentz. John is a contemporary painter whose work is an exploration of process and technique. He is originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, but now lives and works in Paris, France. And John comes on the show today to talk about how he landed in fine art after his foray in illustration. He talks about art being about discovery and experimentation, the power that comes from disconnecting from the world, and why cave paintings inspire him so much. John also discusses how he was taught that he should never paint anybody that he knows and why he is rebelling from that advice now. He also shares why he purposely doesn't analyze certain aspects of his process in order to maintain some of the magic of the creative process. He talks about some of his resistances as well, dealing with anxiety and also the dark ways in which social media platforms are controlling your creative process. And finally, John shares how he chooses which ideas to move forward with, and also turning your list of priorities upside down. John and I cover a lot of great stuff in this episode, and I had an absolute blast speaking with him, so I know that you are going to be incredibly inspired by the very talented John Wentz. Enjoy. John, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you on. Good evening, I guess, for you, or good morning for me. Either way.
Good morning, afternoon for me.
Yeah. Well, I always like to give my guests the opportunity at the start to kind of give a backstory, how you got to the point you are today, and I guess to the location you're at today in Paris.
For me, it was, I don't know, I think that stories for artists are mostly similar. Like mine started as when I was really young, just as a kid, and I was really, really shy and really, really introverted. And so I kind of just took to drawing. And I always tell it as like, and I think it's the same for most people, whereas all kids start out drawing. It's, I think the difference for most artists is you just don't stop. So that's what happened with me. And I got into comic books, and that's what really kind of propelled me into drawing and actually having an interest in art. So I spent a lot of time copying comic panels. Mostly my favorites were like Batman and some Spider-Man comics. And then just kept doing that. And I even, when I went complete nerd, like Dungeons and Dragons, I was drawing like a lot of dragons and, and then in school, and I think the other thing kept you going, and I hear this a lot of people too, is that at first you're really shy and you can't talk to people. So I spent all this time drawing, but then that became the way for me to have friends, because I was, you're that weird kid in class who can draw. So whatever was, the hot thing at the time, like drawing skulls or so, be drawing skulls on people's, folders, and it's a way of getting your friends and attention. So I just kept doing that. And then I kind of did illustration professionally for a bit, working at a record store, reproducing album covers with airbrush. So I had to teach myself airbrushing, and I did that after high school, I think it was. And that's really it. I mean, it's just drawing all the time. The interest in comic books and music and stuff.
And then what was the move from illustration to kind of what you're doing now? Like you're doing all kinds of different cool projects and series. So what was the transition there from illustration to kind of what you're doing now?
The shortest version is when I decided to go to art school, I had a friend, my best friend at the time, he'd gone first. He was a really good painter. He was into illustration. I was kind of really naive I didn't really know about art school. I thought those were a thing of the past. So he enrolls in this art school, and after a few months, I just saw how good he got. So he asked his teachers if I could come through and sit in some classes, and I did, and fell in love with the idea. So I entered art school as an illustration major, and that didn't even really last a year. And it was just the idea of the assignments, like your entire life having these assignments, and you're not really I think that's that point where I learned that I'm more interested in personal expression than I am in, creating something for somebody. So I switched over to the fine art department. And it's just kind of been a journey since then, too, because it was a very traditional school based off of like the French 19th century, methods. And so, upon graduating, I thought fine art meant, a nude person standing, on a model stand. I thought that's what art was, and kind of really went into this almost like an existential crisis. Like I thought I wasted all my time because I had been so far removed from what I was initially into. Growing up, I was in the horror movies and, punk rock and all this stuff. And now I'm painting naked people. And it was really depressing. Then I remember one day I was actually, it was before finishing school, and I was actually considering quitting. The school was by SF MoMA in San Francisco, and they were having a Gerhard Richter exhibition. It was like his 40 years of painting exhibition. And the only thing I knew about Richter at that point was that he did a Sonic Youth album cover. And I thought that it was one of my favorite albums. So I was like, it's the Sonic Youth guy. Let me go check this out. And it completely remapped my brain and really saved my life and reinvigorated the idea of art for me. Just seeing, one, contemporary art, and two, the amount of creativity. It was just amazing, the different styles he worked in, the ideas behind it, anywhere from photorealism to, pure non-objective abstraction. And that really kind of lit a fire inside me. So that's kind of been, what's propelled me ever since then. And I think it helped me realize that for me, making art is really about discovery and experimentation. I'm not good with, sticking with one thing and continuing doing that over a career, So, sorry, that was a little bit longer.
No, you're good. Well, no, when you make that decision to kind of jump ship from illustration into fine art, but it's kind of still like this like question mark, like, okay, like I know I'm not doing exactly what I want to do with illustration. And I don't like the assignment part of it, and I want to express myself, but you're kind of in that limbo period where you haven't found the way that you can kind of successfully express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like? Like, what was the emotional experience like there, where it's like, I know I'm supposed to be creating art, but like you said, I'm sure it felt like a crisis. What advice would you have for people that maybe are in that same position where they know that they're supposed to be creating something? Perhaps they're in school learning stuff and getting assignments that don't really jive with them, that they're learning the technical skills of how to do something, but they just don't feel like they're expressing themselves. Do you have any advice for them to keep soldiering forward until they do find what they want?
Yes and no. It's difficult because I think on one side, there's just this kind of little spark that's indefinable, I think, inside. And almost every artist I know talks about this. Is this little fire inside you that just won't extinguish. And no matter what, that's going to push you forward. And I think now they call it, it's referred to as grit. I think that's the psychological term, is you have grit. But I would say, because this was, for me, was pre-internet or pre-explosion of the internet. It wasn't what it is now. It's definitely pre-social media like Instagram. My advice would be disconnect for a while and kind of do that soul searching, because that's what it was for me. I had to spent a good maybe 2 years figuring out why it was, trying to define what this compulsion was to make art. And I found it for me. So what it was, this self-discovery, I was just reading a lot and finding what actually interested me. Because in school, I was being exposed to all these other artists that, from a technical standpoint, I was like, yeah, this is it. But at the end of the day, it was like empty calories. I didn't know I don't feel nourished. So I had to completely just disconnect from looking at art and do a little bit of soul searching. What are the things that really excite me? What's that thing that kind of, that makes life not boring? And, for me, I found I went all the way back to cave art. And it really answered that question for me, that it's because I was asking questions as far as like, why even make art? It's so superfluous. There's so many other things to do in the world. I have to justify this $100,000 I'm spending on school and making pictures to put on people's walls. And I realized after I went down just long rabbit holes of reading, like I said, it was 2 years watching documentaries, all these things that interest me. And it came to that point, and it was as simple as it's part and parcel to the human condition. We've always made art. And there's very few animals on this planet that do it. So it's a very special thing. And that's the fire that's kind of kept me going. So that would be the advice I would give, is especially now, like I have to take, these social media detoxes. It's completely overwhelming, and it's easy to forget who you are, I think, and a lot of people are comfortable with that. When you see like now social media is down to this formula, people can tell you just look at how somebody else does it. You do all the same pictures, write a caption, ask a question at the end. It's so formulaic. I would say just unplug and take time. It's okay to not be connected.
Right. Cave paintings. Yeah, that I never really thought about that, but I'm always talking on the podcast how creating and being a creator, that's something that is just like inherently inside us as human beings. And I think kind of our purpose, like we're born with that spark, and it's just a matter of exploring it. That's like what you should be doing to figure out what your place in the world is. And you're right, we have been doing it since we can remember, just on caves. But that's so inspirational to think about, like, how do we pass the time when we're sitting in a cave? Let's draw on the walls.
Yeah. And, what became fascinating to me too, is when you look at a lot of these caves, they were not easy to get into, and so in some cases they said they were risking their lives, crawling through these small spaces. So, there was an intention. We don't know exactly why they were doing what they did. And, maybe they didn't either. But it's interesting to me that little fire, that compulsion to make art, that spark was there then. So it makes perfect sense that it's here now.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you talk about disconnecting, and I listened to your interview with Yoshino on Artist Decoded, and I've read some other interviews with you, and it seems like you take disconnecting to an extreme a bit.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit, about spending so much time in your studios and, as you said, never really going out too much?
Yeah, I'm a lot better with it now, but
Okay.
Yeah,
You found a balance.
I found balance finally. Yeah, and I was in a very unhealthy place, I think. But I think it was necessary at the time to really get started and to really understand what it takes to be an artist, I guess, in a way. I don't like the way that sounds, but I guess that's the way to put it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, at that time it was 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would never really hang out with friends. I would just go to art shows now and again. And, a part of that too was, I remember at the time talking with Yoshino, like it was only like a year before that like I was living off like a donut a day. Like I found a donut shop that would sell their day olds for $1. And so I would have like one donut a day, and just, that was how I maneuvered for a year, and just really trying to get art out there. And I think I was really trying to find what I wanted to do as well, like still finding that voice. But I see now, like the disconnecting for me is just digitally. Especially now living in Paris, I think it's really important to go out and be inspired by other things and be inspired by people,
Yeah, absolutely. Especially other creative people, if you can find them.
Yeah, for sure. You can't live on an island by yourself. That's another thing it took a while to learn, is that you're always standing on the shoulder of giants, and we're social creatures. So you're only adding to the mix, it's not just you in whatever it is that you're doing.
Right, absolutely. Well, there is something to be said about when you get started, if you have this kind of like love affair with your art or with whatever you're doing, it's not the worst thing in the world if you're spending all of your time doing it. At least you're doing the thing. At least you're spending the time getting a body of work under you, spending all the time figuring out your style and putting all those hours in up front to start building your empire, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'd like to say, I think it's a necessary thing, I think, in the beginning.
And I know that you also like to paint people you know, or you feel like you can add to the art by knowing their story. How do you choose the people that you're going to paint? And then what's that process like?
I don't, I'm really trying not to sound like use fluffy words or sound too artsy, and
No,
explain things.
fluffy and
But
artsy is great.
I kind of think of it as like, it's that saying, like, I didn't choose the thug life chose me. It's like, I don't really feel like I choose a lot of the people I paint. I feel like in a way that they're being chosen for me. I really move on it like serendipitously. And that's kind of how my life has been just the last 5 years. It's just, for a while I was calling it my Forrest Gump tour. I just kind of let go and let life take its course. So I do that with people that I paint. I try to be a lot more social, and I'm meeting these very interesting people. And then if there's, connection in any way and that interest gets sparked, then I find that I want to paint them.
And then what is the process like of painting them? Do you have them sit for you?
I have them sit for photo sessions.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't paint from life anymore, just from photographs. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one, nobody has the time to really sit anymore. But I don't know if I can really put it into words. There's something interesting to me about the process of the time that I'm spending with that person is not painting. Because it's not like I just meet somebody and then we have a little conversation. Hey, can I paint you? It's usually over the course of me getting to know people. So it could be, for a month, a couple of months. And then I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, you'd be interesting to paint. And so I like this idea of that kind of gestation of the connection. And then I have them sit for a photo session. Probably I can shoot from 10 to sometimes 30 photos. And then that's it, into the studio, and then paint them.
And then hopefully people have checked you out. I mentioned you last week that you'd be on this week.
Oh, cool.
So hopefully they've checked you out and your style out. But you don't necessarily exactly capture their likeness. What is their reaction when they see what you've painted?
I mean, so far it's been positive, at least what they're telling me. I mean,
Right,
I think it's a couple of things. A lot of people, especially here in Paris, which is really cool because of the history, is I think first everybody's kind of like, because how many people get painted? It's such a crazy thing, really, when you think about it.
Right.
It's so different from a photograph. You're seeing somebody's interpretation of you. So I think first it's the novelty. And then I think next is just people are interested to see how you perceive them. So it's usually been a positive, and it works out. The way that I paint too works better, because I remember in school, it's funny because I'm doing the exact opposite of what I was taught. I was always taught to never paint anybody you know. And the reason being is those people that are closest to you are going to really scrutinize how you painted them, because, it's a traditional school. And so they also taught us things in like how to flatter person, things they don't like. Somebody doesn't like their jawline or think their nose is too big. There's tricks you can do to flatter them. So my approach to it is completely the opposite in trying to paint, like capture this sort of like an emotion and the psychology of the person. I don't have to worry about the likeness as much. And it hasn't been a problem really with anybody.
Right. Can you talk about that process though of capturing their essence, I guess, or like trying to share your connection with them? Like, for instance, I know you take like black and white photos and then kind of add your own color or like how you feel, like the color scheme that you feel should be there. Like, how do you make those decisions as you're painting?
That's a part that's, I would say, is primarily intuitive almost. Because I don't always paint in black and white, because all these things are just kind of like a thing. I'm like tools in the bag. So, it depends on what's going on with the painting, who that person is. So yeah, if something's not connecting, then I'll try that. I'll have the photo in black and white and then interpret the color myself. I just try these methods of connecting with that person in my head. I don't know. It's really difficult for me to put into words. And in a way, I don't know if this sounds like, kind of dodging it, but I don't want to put it into words.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird because for me, sorry, this is a bit tangential,
Please.
But
We love tangents.
thanks. Going to the school I went to was so technical that emotion was almost pushed out of it. And actually, for a long period, I was kind of like very stoic in painting, and I was convinced, I'm like, there's no emotion in painting; it's only technical. And now that I've kind of switched over with like a foot in each pond, I don't want to ask too many questions on certain things. And that's one for me that I don't really question too much. There's an intuitive process to it. And I think I need that kind of, I don't know if it's like, I think artists need a certain amount of magic in a sense, in what they do.
For sure.
Cause like for me personally, like I'm completely atheistic on everything in this world. There's everything to me boils down to science and math. And I feel like, when I look at other artists, everybody, they have these crazy beliefs and, all this, they see all this magic. And I think I'm at a period in my life where I think that's actually important to creating art. So now there's certain aspects of my process that I don't analyze too much because I want to keep that unknown to it.
Right.
Sorry, man. I hope that's not really dodging your question.
No. I think you nailed it. There's, I think everybody that creates has that experience where they don't know why they did something. And I think if you try to explore it too much, I always liken it to like, I love listening to music. I love music, but I almost never want to like learn how to create music myself because that would ruin the mystery in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah. So it's like I almost don't want to explore that because I don't want to lose my love for music. Like when I started writing seriously, I couldn't read the same, like because I was always thinking about this is the reason why this writer did this, or you know what I mean, like trying to unpack it. And I think leaving that magic in, especially your own art, whatever you do create yourself, is important because that's where you get that like the fluttering in your heart when you create something. You're like, yes, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that kind of that feeling of like you're standing on the precipice of the unknown, and there's something very exciting about that.
Right. Well, actually, speaking of music, didn't you used to be into music pretty seriously?
Yeah. I played for years in bands and did a decent amount of touring, and that's why I exactly what you said is what I've been saying for years. Is like I remember learning other people's songs, like the people that I was really into, and there was a good chunk of magic lost after learning it. Because I didn't realize how much when listening to it, part of the experience is how do they do that?
Right. It's like finding out about Santa Claus.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So do you still play music, or is that something that you've put aside?
I just started to the last couple of years. I started playing it, but just recording myself, and I have a music project that I'm hoping to get off the ground in like a year, maybe.
Oh, cool.
But it's been a long time. I haven't played. I completely stopped for years when I decided to focus on painting.
Right. You've also, I don't know how recently you started it, but your photography Instagram account.
Oh yeah.
Is that recent?
No, I've had it for a long time. It's always I actually. I don't know, I wouldn't say I studied photography, but I took photography classes before painting. Just when cell phone cameras got good, I just started taking pictures and putting them on that separate account. But the last 3 years, I've tried to become more serious about it. I love photography. I think it's an amazing art form.
Right, especially when it dovetails so nicely with what you're doing. Like you kind of, since the subject isn't sitting for you anyway, like it's a big part of your process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. So the type of photography you're doing now, is it like more like architecture type of stuff, or are you treating that the same way as you treat your art, like kind of not necessarily thinking about it too much, like not trying to think about the magic?
A little bit. I think it's a little bit of all of that. I mean, most of what I do is just kind of your basic street photography. But it does tie in certain ways. Like I'm conscious of things. Like it's a great way to practice composition. That's my favorite part of art making, is composing the picture. And so to me, it's a great way on the fly to practice that. but there's also, for me, it's interesting that it does feed into the art because I started making these assemblages where I'm using the photography. So there's kind of, it creates a dialogue with the paintings. But I think I also continue to do it because it reminds me of the difference between the two, which for me is important. You know, as ubiquitous as photography is now, my personal philosophy is a painting should be as far as possible from a photograph. So it kind of works as almost like, you know, when you turn magnets around and they propel each other.
Yeah.
That's how photography and painting kind of are for me, you know.
That's cool to have those two, to see them that way and to have them like to play against each other.
Yeah, and you know, they can also feed each other. Like I said, I mean, you're both dealing with light. You can never not learn enough about light, you know, and values and, like I said, composition. So,
could you actually talk about those assemblages, because they're kind of like this beautiful combination of things.
yeah.
And we'll link up in the show notes for people to check them out specifically. How did that come to be? Was that sort of accidental, or was that like planned?
A little of both. I'd been for a couple of years wanting to meld the photography, because I wanted to start showing photos on their own, but I also wanted to incorporate them somehow in the work that I do. And so I've been just trying various things, you know, and incorporating them into the paintings. I actually tried a few where I blew up the photos really large and then painted figures into them. Did all these different things that just didn't work. So this current iteration was accidental, and that was when I moved to Paris. And my favorite thing when traveling or when you move to a new place is I love just getting lost, you know, for hours, just walking around and shooting photos. So when I first got here, I would just do it for hours, just aimlessly walk around Paris. And it's weird, on, you know, garbage days here, people throw out the craziest stuff. You know, there'll be like full furniture sets sometimes. There's a lot of garbage, but there's all kinds of other crazy things. And so I'm walking around looking at these things, just started thinking like, oh, that'd be cool to paint on. Or, you know, it started developing into a concept, kind of this dialogue between my current work and moving here to Paris. So I started collecting things while I'm taking photos. So I started collecting those, like the substrate are these fruit crates. Where I live in the 11th by Père Lachaise, and on the boulevard here, they have these markets once a week, and they just throw all these crates out as garbage. So I started collecting those. And then I was collecting books and scraps of paper, and not fully knowing why. And I started later realizing that it was my way of kind of handling the language barrier here. And so I would just come back to the studio with all this stuff in my bag, you know, for better or for worse, trash. And then I started getting my photos printed up. So it was just kind of this part conceived, part, you know, serendipitous thing where I just started piecing these things together, and they worked. And it became interesting to me seeing it look like a full dialogue between the different mediums, you know, but also between what was going on with me and moving to this new place. Right. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, and it kind of brings me to like this question of how you decide to go forward with a project, and perhaps we can use one of your other series as another example. So could you actually describe Navigation Unknown, like how that came to be?
Yeah, that was so that when I lived in New York for a little bit, and I think I'm kind of realizing that all these bodies of work happen when I kind of get fed up with painting, or I get fed up with social media.
Right.
Because that's what happened there. I went through a period where I was just kind of done with painting again. I had some personal issues and some health issues that happened that kind of made me withdraw from people. And so I spent a few months in New York, and I didn't want to paint. So every day I walked around New York from 8 a.m. to sometimes like 2 a.m, and just would photograph every single day. I started noticing. So I'd go back at the end of the day and I'd look through all my photos and see what was really, you know, capturing my attention. And a lot of it was the subway systems. And so I just kind of focused on that a little bit and developed into that body of work. But I think, at the time, it's one of those things where I think the real concept I didn't see until later, until afterwards. And it was just this feeling of isolation, because at the time I really liked this idea of, the subways, and the same here with the metro system in Paris, they're like their own ecosystem. It's really fascinating to watch people operate in these trains. There's all these unscripted behaviors and rules that people abide by. And it's just for this one little moment, in between A and B that people are going to, that we kind of have this little civilization, inside these trains. So it was just an interesting thing for me. But like I said, in hindsight, I can see it was a lot of me just disconnecting, and kind of being tired of things.
Right. I'm glad you put it that way too, because that's kind of the point I wanted to get to or ask you about is like when you are disconnected and you're, for whatever reason, picking up trash or taking photographs on the subway, and then later on you're sitting there looking at it and realizing that, okay, this kind of means something, or this comes together, and you realize that maybe this could be my next body of work or my next project. And I especially want to talk about the moment that you decide to go forward with that thing, because I think everybody listening gets to these points where we have these kind of grand visions all of a sudden of something that came unplanned, but we like suppress them because we have so many of these like thoughts or these ideas, and we never really move forward on one. So what makes you go forward on that one thing?
I think it's kind of two things. One, it's an obsession. And I think that's normal for creatives. You probably experience that as a writer.
Oh, yeah.
Like you just get obsessed on the topic and you have to pursue it for some unknown reason. But the other is having a deadline. I mean, that's the practical answer. Is I know all these are going to culminate in a show, and I'm fortunate in that position that, it's like with Hashimoto, who I work with, it's every 12 to 18 months I have a solo show. So that kind of deadline and that goal is what helps me hone in on it. And, it's funny, I was reading, I can't remember. Oh, Trent Park, the photographer, Trent Park. I was reading about him yesterday, and I forgot who the interviewer was, but he asked him a similar question. And he was saying, like, when he works, anytime he's taking a photograph, he's thinking about the end game. Like, this is going to be in a book. And it helps kind of put some blinders on and, force you to focus on a cohesiveness in the work and getting it out there. That's what I think anybody should do, whether or not they're showing in a gallery. You somehow set some kind of goal for yourself to have this done.
Right.
And also I think it's the other thing too with any art. One of the best things I ever learned from a teacher was that making it's only 50%. The other 50% is getting it in front of an audience and creating a dialogue. So that's the other thing that pushes me is like, okay, I have this obsession right now and this thing that I find really interesting. Now I need to communicate it with other people. So that's going to force me to focus and get it done.
Right. That makes sense. The other thing I like about especially the story about Navigation Unknown, is that it's okay to disconnect sometimes. And like, if you're, quote, done with painting, like it's okay to take a break. And just because you disconnect for a while, that doesn't mean that you quit forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's funny because I think for all the good that social media has done for artists, I'm at a point where I'm thinking it's done more harm than good. People want to say, oh, it's freed us. We can do our own advertising. But I remember at that period, I would talk to a few friends, or every once in a while I would jump on social media, and artists were complaining about their follower count, all these like false vanity metrics, I got to keep relevant. I got to keep posting, otherwise people forget about me. And it's like, well, maybe you're sacrificing quality for quantity, and you're also being controlled by these algorithms. Everybody wants their algorithm hack, but the truth is there is no algorithm hack, And I remember an interesting thing I noticed. This is what really got me, because, I was really addicted to Instagram and thought it was, the cornerstone of having an art career, until I realized like I didn't go on at first for 30 days. I didn't even click that app. And I'd read an article, I can't remember, but I think it might have been a Gizmodo article when I was in New York, and they were talking about Instagram, where they have these, bots. Like you take any account with a large following, and a certain percentage are going to be fake accounts. And what these fake accounts are programmed to do is when you're not posting, they start unfollowing you to create a panic. And so you have to start, putting content, which I think is the worst term in the world, is you got to start putting content out there. So they're controlling your creative process, which is just the most, I don't know, it's just a very dark thing to me.
Ooh, I feel so dirty.
Yeah. And I didn't go on, like I said, for 30 days, and I lost like 600 followers. They're like, how's that even possible? Like 600 people are like, oh, this dude ain't posting, I'm unfollowing, and exactly what that article said happened. And then they said, like, once you post, then you'll get this surge of likes and follows. And that's to, get your psychology going that, oh, okay, this is good. Now I want more. I want more of these dopamine hits. And so, man, disconnect. I think it's the best thing anybody can do.
Oh, man.
It's such a dark thing.
It is. It is such a dark thing. It's something that I've been trying to explore on this podcast and figure out how to navigate it, because it's still so necessary, especially
for sure
for starting out. And it's like also a really good tool to practice putting yourself out there, to practice sharing your work, especially if you don't have a community. But it is, I think you're right. I think sometimes it's done more harm than good, and not just from like the output end, also from like input. Like sometimes it's obviously it sucks to see how awesome other artists are and comparing yourself to other people and, oh man, I'll never be that good. But also just seeing the sheer amount of other people that there are that are creating, it's both inspiring and terrifying at the same time, because then you feel like, all right, well, like, what does it matter if I put my voice out there, put myself out there? There's so many other people doing it. Like, who am I,
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. You start to wonder, like, what's the point? You see so many voices out there. What good is my voice?
Right. I was wondering, do you have any like voices in your own head, any kind of resistances, things like as you're creating, aside from, wanting to just overall quit painting or taking breaks and stuff like that? Any things that kind of hold you back?
Yeah, I have both rational and irrational voices.
Yeah.
And it's funny that actually we're doing this now, because I've never really talked about this. I mean, not like I've done like many podcasts, but I don't really tell people about it. But I have severe anxiety, and I just went through an episode for a few days now, or maybe about a week. I think it almost lasted. And that's an irrational thing that happens. So that for me, that's a personal one. So I have to be aware, because with the anxiety comes like a lot of depression and paranoia, and these voices just telling you, you're not worth it. What's the point of doing this and all this silly stuff. So that's a personal one I have to overcome. Just be like, okay, I'm going to ride this out. I know what this is. And then the other ones, yeah. I mean, when you look at, I think almost any. Well, not any creative. If you're a graphic designer, it's a little better. But, let's just say painters. On paper, it is the worst business plan imaginable. It's,
yeah.
It is. It's really absurd. And so I have to kind of be practical with those things, like to be more realistic, I have to make sure my head's not in the clouds, because as an artist, you want to be. That's where ideas come from, and think, oh, this is going to work out. But same time, I have to ground myself and realize, like, okay, it's going to be the market changes every year. This may be a lean year. I'm going to have to really tighten the belt strap, and continue working. And so just being realistic with myself. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, kind of.
Yeah, no, it does. I think we all have anxiety, and I think it comes in waves, and sometimes it's just there barely, and sometimes it just cripples you for a week or a month or whatever it may be. I think that's something that it comes hand in hand with being a creative person, and obviously for some it's more of a serious problem, but yeah, it's like when you get that, it's riding it out, But then also, I agree with you about the business aspect of things. Do you have any advice, like any practical advice for people to, as you said, tighten the belt strap to be able to weather those lean times, especially starting out?
Oh boy, do I! I've had to come up with some methods. Um, yeah, there's a few things I always tell myself. Like one, one of my favorite images in all of the world is the it was the Voyager image that Carl Sagan was responsible for. I mean, when you had them turn around Voyager and take a photo of the Earth.
Right, pale blue dot.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was even in Cosmos. He says that really beautiful thing about how all the wars, all the worries, all the deaths, all this stuff are contained to this one pale blue dot. And I tend to think about that a lot, like, because it's so easy when you're getting very anxious or you're getting upset or discouraged or all these things, it's all in your head. Like, you don't know how it's going to play out. So I mentally kind of, I do a lot of meditation too. So I'll kind of get that image in my head and just realize, like, man, my worries are a flea on the flea on the flea on the flea of a donkey's ass. Like, it's so minuscule.
Yeah.
And it can change in an hour. It can change by tomorrow. But there's two other things. It's funny because I have to admit I got a little bit of prepped because when you ask what do you say to get, well, I don't want to take it away from you at the end, but the advice thing at the end of your podcast.
Yeah,
there was two things that have always stuck with me. This one helps me a lot. When I was out of school and I went through another period of like, I don't know if I can do this. A friend sent me this excerpt from an interview with Laurie Anderson. I can't remember if it was John Cage that told her this, but she said she was freshly out of school and immediately realized, like, oh my God, I got to eat. I got to do this. I got to pay my bills. And so she was focusing on that and wasn't getting any artwork done. And so it was, like I said, I think John Cage that said, like, you need to turn that list you're making upside down. And if you focus on making your art and basically you're saying whatever you put your energy into is what's going to manifest. So if you're putting your energy into worrying about just paying your bills all the time, that's going to be your concern. And so that leads down this path of, okay, well, art is not the viable way to do that. So I got to go get a job where I'm not making art. But if you turn it around and go, okay, I'm putting all my energy into doing this thing that I love, it'll feed everything else, all those other needs. And I've found that to be very true. I think about that a lot. If I'm worrying about, again, I don't know, some bills or, it's something you look around your life and you see your friends, they got kids and they're doing this thing. I was like, well, I need to take that list and turn it upside down. What's more important to me is making art. And every time I've done that, everything falls into place. So it helps to kind of abate those worries.
Right. Yeah, I love that idea of turning the list upside down. It might be hard to read, but I totally agree that putting your thoughts and energy and emotions and priority into anything is what kind of transpires around you. Like, that's what kind of attracts everything else. And it's not like believing in yourself, but it's like just believing that all your time spent in this endeavor, even if you don't know the end result, even if you don't know exactly how you're going to get there, whatever your creative output is, like the time that you put into that and start thinking about it as, all right, this is a way that I can make money. Like, you'll start to figure those ways out. It's different for each person, but kind of like, finding your next project, like walking around on the streets and picking up trash, like it's just like putting your time into it, and then life finds a way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's similar to although I don't fully believe it, but the Campbell's follow your bliss. I mean, it's all in the same arena of ideology, I guess.
Right. Well, before we get to that final push, I wanted to actually talk about Nowave Academy. I know you were just in the States and spent some time with them. Can you talk about your course on there and also like Nowave and your experience there?
Yeah. I'm super excited about that. They're starting the Nowave Academy, or they've already started. I think there's 2 listed. And I love the idea. So taking artists that they normally work with and then doing instructional courses or almost like a demo video. What was great for me is I've done that before in just a technical setting. So in this, they kind of just said, do what you want to show your process, what take the approach you want to take. So for me, I wanted to focus a little bit less on the technical aspects and kind of on like the, for lack of a better word, the philosophy of how I approach a painting. So that was my focus on it, with a little bit of talking about technical stuff. Kind of set up for like, beginning to middle range painters. And those guys are great, man. It was such an honor to work with them. I've known, like, you sing with Yoshino. I've known him for a while. So I was really honored to be asked to do that. And it was great. I never saw the space before. I hadn't been to LA in a long time. So they got a really cool space there, and they're doing really amazing things. Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Very cool. We'll link up where people can find that at the show notes page today, here, creativepush.com/330. And also, before we get to the end, I wanted to talk about what your experience has been like living in Paris now for a year and a half, I think you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about there.
What has that been like, especially you were from the San Francisco area, right?
Yeah.
What's that been like, being in a completely new place now?
Man, it's been the ultimate unplugging I've ever done. It's
right.
been the best. Yeah, it's because Paris is just such an amazing city, man. Like the art here, like the history of it is just palpable in everything. Like it's in the air, you can taste it. And you walk down the street, like everything from making, the baguettes and croissants to architecture, everything is art. So that's been amazing and totally inspirational. And, there's other things, they're not as tuned in to social media here. And I've talked about this a little bit before. It was, really refreshing to me when I first came here. Like the studio, my girlfriend's a painter, and we have a shared studio space with other artists. And, everybody's been really great. I've made some great friends, and they tolerate my almost non-existent French, and they try to speak English to me. And first conversations we were having was just about art and their ideas and emotion and art and all these things. And these were, sadly enough, like conversations I hadn't had in a while, because I'm used to, in the States, everybody's on that business end, talking again. It's like, is it social media, your SEO, all this stuff that I've just really kind of personally been a little tapped on, So it's very refreshing. And then also, just for me too, the political climate in the U.S. really started getting me down. So it's nice to just be removed from that here. French have their own thing going on. We've been having these riots going on for a couple of months, but, it's different in the U.S. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I co-sign. I'd like to be in Paris, and even in the middle of the riot, maybe some days here. Yeah.
It was weird when I just came back, for the show. Just within a week, like I was zapped, man. Like just talking with people, and I got pulled into arguing about politics, and there's just more to life, I'm just need a break. So Paris it's been great, and man, you can't beat the food here either. Between the food and the art, it's a good place.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and I feel like, I had a goal for myself to make you say baguette, and so I feel like this is a victory. So.
Not fromage, just baguette.
Well, you said croissant too. That was like bonus points. So.
Yeah. And I say it like I used to, I remember years ago, like I worked at like a coffee shop in Berkeley, and I used to make fun of the people who would say croissant, like, like
croissant
in France. Yeah. And now I'm that person. I don't say croissant anymore. I say croissant.
Croissant. I think
croissant.
If that's the only thing you get from Paris, then I think it's a victory. So
yeah, I'll count it as a win.
Oh man. John, this has been awesome talking with you and a lot of fun.
Same, man.
It's time for the final push, though. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Okay. Neither of these are my own. I have two things I would say that I've lived by. And one is an old story. I don't even know where it originates, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's Have you heard the story about the guru and the businessman?
No.
Where they're walking along a beach, and I'll paraphrase it, but the businessman's asking him, how to be successful. That's the guru. And, the guru takes him out into the water, and they get like chest high in the water. And the guy's like confused. He's like, I don't get it, man. How can I be successful? And right away, the guru grabs him by the head and dunks him under the water and holds him there. And he can't breathe. And he starts drowning, and then he lets him up. And the guy freaks out. He's like, what the fuck, man? I just want to know how to be successful. What are you doing? And he grabs him again and dunks him under the water. And he does this like 3 times. And after the last one, the guy says, whatever it is you want, you have to want it like you wanted that breath of air down there.
Mm.
And I've never heard anything truer. And if that's how you feel about something, then you need to pursue it in some capacity. And that's a thing I remind myself of that story at least once a month. And it's kind of like a self check-in. Like, do I want it that bad? Like a drowning man would want air. And the answer for me is always yes. And then there's a simple one. And I think this is one of the best pieces of advices I've ever heard. And it came from Cheech Marin, of Cheech and Chong.
Sure.
And because someone asked him one time, like, what advice can you give me? And in acting. But he didn't give him acting advice. He said, don't be a dick. And I was like, what? That's not advice. And he said, no, think about it. And it's actually great advice. He's like, word of mouth is everything in anything. And always be good to somebody, not just because it's just the right thing to do, but you don't want anyone to ever say like, oh yeah, I wouldn't work with that guy. He's a dick. So it's kind of business and life advice on that one. And it seems pretty simple and stupid, but I've also found out because the people that I wind up, being friends with, working with the most, the people I'm honored to call friends that are artists are always just great people. And they're the people I want to be around, and they ignite something in me. And so it's kind of a way of paying that forward, I think. So I that's a little bit different, I think, to what you're asking, but those are my 2 things. If I could grab somebody, and be like, this is it, man.
Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick and want it like a drowning man wants air, or woman.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's advice to live by. It's like, it's easy to forget that sometimes because you go through your own day and you have your own problems, and that's going to come out. But like, just try to be a sweetheart to other people so that they're a sweetheart to you. Like, that's like the happiest way to live.
Yeah, for sure. At the end of the day, when you're dead, you don't want anyone saying like that guy was an asshole.
Right.
You want to say what a great person you were.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you for being a great person to us today, for kind of sharing your story with us and your advice. And it was a pleasure, man.
Thanks, man. It was really an honor. I'm really, really stoked that you asked me to do this. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks. And for everybody listening, you can find John on his website, johnwentz.com. That's WENTZ. .com, and on Instagram he is John Wentz, and we'll have everything we talked about today linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/330. John, thanks again.
Thank you.
My thanks to John once again for coming on the show. It was such a blast talking with him, and always a pleasure to be reminded to turn that list of priorities upside down. If you are sitting there looking at your to-do list, or you have your mental to-do list, all of the life things that you have to get done, and perhaps your creative passion is way down there, so far down there that you won't even get to your creative passion for a week or a month, especially as that list keeps getting longer and longer. But it's such sound advice to flip that list upside down so that your art becomes a thing that you get to every single day, that you are reaching into the depths of your creative soul every single day and making that a priority so that it seeps into all of the other aspects of your life. Like John talked about with the cave paintings, we have always wanted to express ourselves and to make our mark on this world. People were even willing to risk their lives to do so. So just think about that today. You don't have to risk your life to get your art done, but you can still make it the cornerstone of your life. On our next episode, we have Suzanne Clay. Suzanne is an asexual woman with a great love for writing erotic romance, and she enjoys spending her time confusing people with that fact. If you want to find out more about Suzanne and check out her writing, you can head to her website, suzanneclay.com, or you can head to today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/330, where we will have everywhere else you can find her, as well as everything we talked about today with John. But that's all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, to go and turn your list of priorities upside down, and to attack your creative passion. I love you all so much. Go and get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.